COVID was the mortification of the ego. We interfaced with something that told us, under no circumstances do you have control. A split between science and observation and the more feminine, and seeing that there isn't actually an inherent split. Bringing these two together looks like, oh, I noticed that the sun is sitting in your 7th house. Do you find it really difficult sometimes to feel validated every single time the person's going to say, always, we don't need the astrology anymore, because the astrology was the portal. Life is a co-creative experience and intimacy. That's why we're so afraid of it, because it means death. If you want to learn about the sign Capricorn, don't study the astrology internet. Go and understand the function of a bark on the tree. 21st of December, the last 25 years, it's now going to be here. We needed to deny religion. We're seeking God up there. The Aquarius age, which is actually, no, sorry, this is what seems to actually create aliveness. And if we can agree that we might differentiate in our perceptions, we are truly embodying the new spiritual stage. This is going to sound a bit weird, but people have ascribed to being addicted to a hardcore drug.
Just want to jump in real quick. Do not be worried about sounding weird. You're definitely not the weirdest person here, especially not even in this conversation. So go ahead.
Go.
Welcome, Nomads, to the final episode of 2020, my favorite year ever. Sarcasm, with episode number 11 of Noetic Nomads. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that we're entering a new year and perhaps a new age with my guest today, Simon Vorster, evolutionary astrologer and human designer, who with his soul partner Jen are helping bring to being a whole new way of sense making, which I honestly find fascinating. Simon and I connected through our guest from episode number 4 of Noetic Nomads, my fellow manifester Monica, and I am so happy we did, because this opened up new portals for me. Like many, when I hear the word astrology, I'm like, you mean that horoscope stuff that new agey people used to read in their local newspapers? Why would I be into that? But when I started digging into Simon's work and spoke with him for our episode, I was like, wow, evolutionary astrology may actually not be just a legit meta-modern move. Also, astrologers could be like the ultimate sense makers. Don't believe me? Listen to our episode where we explore the wounded masculine and the rejection of the anima. How I and many others are starting to embody the cyclical, sensory, and more feminine parts of our being. How the movements of the stars play into that. The way in which evolutionary astrology bridges the gap between the rational and observational and the intuitive, and what the Jupiter-Saturn Conjunction of December 21st is going to mean for humanity. As always, watch on YouTube and listen on podcasts. Follow us at noeticnomads.org on Twitter, and join the bustling new Noetic Nomads Discord community, where a whole bunch of crazy stuff is starting to go down. Check out the show notes for your invite. All right, now let's get into this and say a final farewell to 2020 and officially enter 2021 in a new age, an Aquarian one, with the raiser of vibrations himself, Simon Vorster. Our recording. Welcome everyone to another episode of Noetic Nomads. I'm Albert Kim, definitely the weirdest physical form my soul has ever taken. And the stars must have aligned for us, because with me today is a spiritual sage who's leading the charge in humankind's transformation from Homo sapiens into Homo sapiens intransitus. From a very young age, he's curiously sought out what it really is that lies beyond the curtain of reality, searching for the answers to perennial questions such as, who am I? Why am I here? And what are my lessons? His soul path was met by astrology at the age of 18. And since then, he and his soul partner, Jen, have embarked together on a journey of integration, healing, and awakening, and have co-created and brought to the world their unique gift, raising vibrations, a vehicle through which they help nurture other souls in becoming aware of their own journeys throughout time, of what opportunities this lifetime has afforded them to integrate and heal through, and remembering who they truly are as spiritual beings on a human quest. Nomads, please help me in introducing a husband, father, founder, world traveler, and a fellow divine being sent here to guide us in a reflection of which already exists within. He is the one and only Simon Vorster. Thank you so much for coming on today, Simon.
Yeah, that was amazing. That is probably that is by far the coolest intro that I've experienced. really, really grateful for that.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Simon. I mean, like, again, like your background is really interesting. I had a great time researching all about you. And again, thank you so much for coming on today and maybe sharing your story and insights with our audience. So I'd like to start also in your own words. So how is it that you came across this weirdo over here?
Well, so we have a mutual friend by the name of Monica Bravo, and she had made contact with you, or you guys made contact with each other through Rebel Wisdom. And I think she did an interview with you, and in a true manifestor style, using human design language, which I'm sure we'll get into. She initiated this conversation, and so here we are, sharing the space.
Yeah, there have been a lot of synchronicities happening in my life since I started this project. And interestingly, I guess I'm gonna get into some inside baseball that you actually told to join the Rebel Wisdom community right as Monica was about to tell you about it. So I was wondering how that came along and what your interest is in Rebel Wisdom and communities such as that.
Well, my interest, which I'm sure many people that came through to Rebel Wisdom, was with their documentary with Jordan Peterson. And interestingly, at the time, I'd noticed Jordan Peterson being somebody that was, I think, 2017 and 2018, he was really making, he's also a manifestor, a lot of impact in the world. And I didn't pay much attention to it, but I noticed there was a lot of like blowback from people who had felt that this person, Jordan Peterson, was, not a good person, etc. Kind of just left it, didn't really pay attention to it until I'd seen the documentary that they had put together, which was The Glitch in the Matrix.
Yes.
And so I watched that, and then I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then I started to delve more deeper, like we all do when we go on the internet, into understanding this. And it was through my personal journey within myself around, being a man and understanding this really weird transition that we're all going through at the moment, and what it means to heal the masculine side of myself, very big part of my personal story. I'd seen that they had a retreat. And so I was digesting some of Rebel Wisdom's content. I was really vibing with it. I started to investigate Jordan Peterson's chart, did a whole entire sort of collection of information around it, saw how it was impacting a lot of people that were on the Rebel Wisdom community. And I liked what they were doing. So it was exactly in about 3 days from today, so on the 23rd last year, I traveled to the UK to do a Rebel Wisdom retreat. And that from then onwards, it was just kind of, digging their vibe, checking out what they were doing, just really, in a sense, finding the essence of what their message is, and what they hold as something that I resonate with. So I just kind of stayed along with that process, and also integrated a tremendous amount of work that they had put through on that retreat as well. Doing my research, I saw that a big part of your healing journey for you was sort of to heal this wounded masculine archetype. I found that very interesting. Would you be okay with going into what you meant by that? Absolutely. So, well, I grew up in South Africa, who, within the context of our cultural conditioning around patriarchy, would be very close to what, within the context of like the last, say, 50, 60 years. I grew up in South Africa and was very much a part of a culture that was deeply divided by segregation and very dominant types of authority figures that felt that it was really important to maintain control in very brutal type ways. So growing up in South Africa, of course, very close to my actual parents' lineage and them themselves, their truth and their perceptions of life were rooted in this wounded aspect. So I had two parents who were the men in my life were very wounded by this. And so, of course, that moved on to me. I absorbed that material, and I was very sensitive to this alienation within myself around, and I actually consider it to be still to this day, and I'm working on it a lot, the shadow or the nemesis. It's a type of masculine that is very assertive it's very, very dominant, very assertive. I noticed that there's a sensitivity there. And so throughout my schooling life and growing up, I noticed that there was a very strong sensitivity to boys that had a very assertive, aggressive nature. And it was only actually within the last 4 years that I really come to understand what that sensitivity was about, because it became cultural. I started to notice, it wasn't just me. There was actually a large percentage of, I don't even know how to describe it, but I would say just a very distorted reflection or wounded aspect of our masculinity that has not integrated the anima, right? So one of the masculine side, if we're using Jung's work here, the anima has been rejected or neglected or basically not in contact with. And so it was that I came into contact, okay, now I'm starting to notice a relationship to my mother, starting the relationship to where I deny my feelings. And it kind of just spiraled into a tremendous amount of insight around that. And that's what it means to me personally and how I came into contact with that. Growing up in South Africa, being very exposed to patriarchal truths and values. And then, over the last 3 years, 4 years, really coming to understand it fully as to what that means.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah, that's very clear. And and especially when you brought up archetypes and because I'm very, very new to this whole astrology thing. So when I was diving into your work, it's very intimidating because it's literally like learning a whole new language. Sure. And the thing with astrology is if people were just gonna jump into it and maybe watch a random video of yours, and then they would hear maybe talk about ascending and transits, and it would be they're like, what is going on? But one thing that I really loved about your work is you really dove deep into what is the intent behind all this. It's not just this. It's not just I'm predicting, I'm this sign, this is how I am, this is a prediction of the future. You're really digging into, okay, so what does it really represent? Why are people, what is the underlying, urge has driven them into this? And then I believe that a lot of people have these misconceptions, especially I would say in the West, in the United States at least, of astrology as a certain type of thing. But what you're doing with your work with evolutionary astrology and human design seems to be a bit different. So could you inform our audience, what exactly is it about evolutionary astrology and your work that may be different from what they think is astrology?
I love the question because it opens up a tremendous part of me as a person, and so whenever I get the opportunity to really talk about that, I get extremely excited because the core intention behind that type of behavior is deeply rooted in the recognition of the split between science and observation and the more feminine nature of our behavior, which is more of the abstract going into the unconscious and seeing that there isn't actually an inherent split, right? So what tends to happen in our culture in the past with regards to astrology is that there hasn't been sufficient amount of communication and recognition as something that can be translated in psychological behavior, right? So EA brings that component to the table. So it takes a planet like, for instance, the sun, and you said it perfectly. I am a translator. One of the things that I wrestle with a lot within my work is how to translate the word ascendant into something that actually any person can come onto my video and go, okay, I understand what you mean. That's something that is a very big part. It's about trying to bridge between the observation, correlation, very scientific mind, it's very rational, and the more metaphysical aspect of our nature, which exists as well. Right, so there's been an overemphasis on this right brain experience. It's got a kind of religious connotation to it, and we have to kind of imagine something. Whereas my intention is to synthesize the two. So a very simple example: we could take the sun within the context of the chart, in an astrology chart, and we can say, okay, symbolically, here's where this position is. But if we were to translate it to a practical thing, I would say, here's where, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you notice that there's a sense of invalidation or you're not feeling aliveness within the conversation, that's the sun, because the sun represents the part of us that is the light. So, you're having a conversation and then the person's just looking on their phone, they're not really interested in you. You can feel that sense of, wow, this person's not present with me, right? You can sense and feel that there is no recognition, there's no validation. And so wherever we have the sun, we're going to have two aspects to it. We're going to have the part of us that feels the sense of, this is what I feel is meaningful to me. And then there's also going to be a wounded part around that that's still rooted in the childlike quality of, will you please see me? You know?
Yeah.
So when you look at somebody's charts and you say, oh, okay, well, there's a kind of aspect happening, again, astrological language, to that sun sign, the value in bringing these two metaphysical and then observation behaviorisms together looks like, oh, I noticed that the sun is sitting in your 7th house. Do you find it really difficult sometimes to feel validated in relationships? And every single time the person's going to say, oh, always, you know, and then that opens up this opportunity for a conversation that's very real for the person. We don't need the astrology anymore because the astrology was the portal, right?
Yeah,
that was it.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing that you just said that, because like when I was going over your work, that's kind of like one of the realizations I came to. I was like, wow, Simon, now I know why Monica was telling me to talk to you, because it's just like, after a while, I was like, astrology. And after I get past the fact that it's just astrology and what you're really digging into, I was like, we don't even honestly even need that other stuff. It's all, yeah, it's like, you know, like, because what you're speaking about, it just like, you know, I was like, oh yeah, sign me up, Simon, and put me up for your, you know, all your courses. Because like one thing that really surprised me is that there was a lot of talk in like your videos and all that about how useful it is of practicality, of like embodiment, you know, and I was like, I was not expecting that, you know, in, you know, something reading, going into astrology. So I was wondering, like, what is that? Is it about utility? Was it something that you've always felt you just wanted to bring something to the world and it wasn't translated well? Or where do you think that comes from?
Actually, the translation itself comes from a trauma, which is always the case a lot with people who find themselves in these types of roles where they feel that there's a meaning behind what they want to share. So I definitely consider myself to be not an exception in that place. The reason why I picked up astrology, you know, within the context of this lifetime was to be able to translate very intuitive understanding of something. And I couldn't. It was like there was a deep sense of knowing about things, but the ability to articulate it wasn't there. And so astrology gives me a tool to be able to, in a sense, frame stuff that is deeply aware. But again, as I allow myself to use the astrology and I connect with it, it also reminds me of many, many times having conversations with people and ending the sentence with, does that make sense? Because there is a part of me that can become very abstract and very non-linear. And there's a part of me that within the context of digging deep can go so far into an anatomical level that what it is that I'm trying to describe or talk about, the person's already disassociated. They've gone like, dude, I don't get it. Just like the videos. So really the YouTube itself, while it seems like me talking to people saying, hey, yeah, I want to do this because I feel, you know, a sense of self-importance around talking astrology, is actually a mirror for me. And every time I hear somebody say, I get that, that makes sense, you helped me, I feel that as a feedback loop to say, okay, the idea and the intention I set in the video has landed for people, because I know I can talk astrology. I know I can synthesize things. But if the other person says I found value in that, to me, that's more rewarding. Do you understand? So there's this kind of process in which it's actually feeling heard. And the trauma is birthed, that was birthed out of that trauma of really having not feeling heard or seen in any way whatsoever. And so this platform gives me the opportunity to practice taking very deep concepts and translating them into something where Albert can sit and say, yeah, okay, yeah, I noticed that in my relationships, I tend to struggle with validation. Okay, there's the sun sign sitting there. Let's see what else is around that. Here's a way to actually to identify what could be important for you or not, as an example. And so in that way, it becomes, again, translatable and practical. And you walk away with value, you know?
And like one thing, I mean, just going to my personal, I guess, relationship with astrology and like spiritual practices in general. I was brought up in a Catholic family. I was born in South Korea, and then I moved to the United States, and I've lived here since I was 2. And then like a lot of teenagers, when I was like 12, 13 years old, I was like, okay, this Catholic stuff, this is kind of not, okay, I think it's kind of stupid. I'm going to reject it. And I just reject the whole spiritual paradigm in general. And then along with that is also possibly anything that, because even in the adjacent realm, such as like in astrology, which can be like, I've seen you talk about how like maybe they could all be lumped together. But over the years, I've become more opened up, especially I was exposed to more Eastern practices. And I'm getting to the point, and like there's this, I guess you could call it a meta modern. It's like a burgeoning movement coming on, where instead of, you know, the modernist paradigm was like, okay, scientific rationalism, empiricism, extremely linear, all of that. And then there's the postmodern, you know, which starts in the art world and then goes on into the culture. We're trying to break down the old modernist paradigm. Like, okay, we got to look at all these other different ways of being and knowing. And now, and like me, like I went through that. It's kind of like my militant atheism was almost like a modernist. And then I was like, oh, and then I started freeing up and started moving more into postmodern. But now there's a meta modern where I think perhaps, I don't know if you think this agrees with what you may think, is that we accept that there are truths, but they're not necessarily objective truths. And then there are modalities, that there are stories, right, that we can all buy into and use as a tool to, you know, further whatever it is, while not necessarily being lost in it. Now, this is all coming, like, this is all like my own thoughts. I was wondering if you think perhaps like what your work is doing with evolutionary astrology, human design, is kind of like also kind of like part of this emerging meta modern paradigm. I just wonder your thoughts.
Okay. So we're going to take off a little bit, Joe. We're going to go a little bit deep, and we're going to go into the fringe of awareness and consciousness. And I'm going to try my best to remain as practical as possible relating to real life examples, but also at the same time reveal that there is something beyond our most immediate senses that's actually driving this. I'll circle back to the question around what really is about evolutionary astrology or this material and communication and translation, what was important for me for that. And I talked about it being a trauma. Okay. And again, evolutionary astrology, it talks about the Sagittarius sign. In traditional kind of looking just at the internet, you'll see astrology is described in a very personified way. It's got a human quality to it, you know, Sagittarius, fire, blah, 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 right? Whereas Sag, from the EA perspective, actually says that every single one of us, right, exists within this sphere of life that is incredibly overwhelming to our brain's function. And to be able to make sense of that, we need a guiding system, a system of thought that allows us to translate the phenomena of reality. So immediately held within that core understanding of the sign Sagittarius, we disengage any idea of personality quality traits, and we look at functionality and the way that we as life, and when I say we as life, I mean including human beings as sentient and are connected to everything within this plane of existence, trees, everything here. It's all part of an ecosystem that is, in a sense, of a greater ecosystem that is on an archetypical realm. Okay. So we have this archetypical realm, and within that we have life. So human beings within the construct of this archetypical life, the Sag sign is our capacity to try to make sense of reality using an organizing system. Okay. We need that sense of identity. Right? That's why religion will have a lot of people who will align with its philosophy system. It gives them an identity. And at the root of that, there is security, very primal need for that safety, right? So philosophy gives these two things. So that being said, me particularly in terms of trauma, I used a philosophical system as an overlay to make sense of the world. Now, why did I need that? It was a protection mechanism. It was a deep disassociation from early life childhood trauma, the loss of the parent, all of these types of things. I just naturally escaped into that world. Jung calls this the natural relationship between the core of the self, which is again something that's not a personality, but just the core of your being, and then how we constellate an idea of ourselves in relation to how we meet life. So as a 2-year-old, we'll venture out away from mom, we'll come back and we'll have a set of experiences in relation to this moving away from safety experiencing something and then coming back. So I needed this core philosophy. And I would say that every single one of us needs this, because the function of the psyche itself and the core self, if we had to just draw a circle, it needs to interrelate with the phenomena of reality. Our brain needs to be able to map reality.
Yeah.
So we need this structure, this map of reality, Sagittarius, okay? So we all need it. Now, fast forward to where we are today in terms of the complexity of these changing models of thinking, because there's such a diversity in our ability to express our thoughts, opinions, because of the internet, we have an onset of ideas, thoughts, and perspectives now becoming even more available. And people are, in this sense, from where I stand, we're all aligning with certain truths, but of course, truth itself is not static by nature. Again, from my perspective, very limited. When I say static by nature, is that it's always in a constant process of, it might be true at this moment, but we could come into some information that could then adjust the understanding of that. And so therefore we would say, okay, what we thought was true is now something completely, untrue. And so therefore this new entire arcing sense of truth or awareness trumps that. And then we develop more structure of thinking around that, right? So I see this kind of trickling of energy, as it were, consciousness that's just expanding. And as we're expanding, or as that energy expands, so does it broaden our umbrella, which is the philosophical structure that we would use. And of course, part of the philosophical structure is a narrative. In other words, how do we be able to intellectualize this very stratosphere of ideas, right? So the narrative is the connection between the two. And so in a sense, with the broad stroke expression of the internet and the capacity for us to share these ideas, of course, it would be natural for us to start to have conflict around different ideas and different perspectives being available, present, and us tapping into them. And that, I think, in and of itself creates what you were talking about, which is narratives, and then they adjust, and then we become more aware of stuff, and then somebody disagrees with that. And, it becomes very much this stratosphere of different ideas and different perspectives existing and then having its life of its own. So that being said,
I love it. Keep going. This is amazing. Yeah.
That being said, with in terms of the fringe, from an EA perspective or evolutionary astrology point of view, and looking at some of the Eastern philosophies, particularly around the Yuga cycles. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Yuga cycles,
like Kali Yuga and all that. Yeah,
precisely.
Yes,
exactly. So there's an interconnection between our solar system and its rotation around a larger star system. I'm not very specific on the language around the astronomy of it, but there is a considerable amount of research I have on my PC that speaks to the science behind what the Kali Yuga cycle would represent, or XYZ. So getting to the point here with regards to this next phase was, so we would have these greater cycles, just like we would have the sun and the moon cycle, right? Of course, our solar system moves through these cycles. And so it's not an uncommon phenomena within Eastern philosophies to be able to recognize very distinct expressions in human consciousness relative to these cycles. Okay. The last 2,000 years, humanity has moved through what is called the Virgo-Pisces age. Okay. Now, this is deeply misunderstood from a very disassociated, right brain, abstract, nonlinear, lacking critical thinking expression of astrology, and especially within just the consensus thinking. It's like, what do you mean Virgo-Pisces age of Aquarius? What does that mean? Right? People just kind of share it out loud. But what we're actually talking about here is very distinct behavior patterns within the human experience that's related to religion. And the reason why is because the Pisces sign itself is a reflection of consciousness that is deeply rooted in surrender. Okay. It's deeply rooted in the behavior of surrender. So it's like, it is the process in which we do not have any boundaries. And so our relationship to the experience is a sense of surrendering to something. Okay. Boundaries equal our ability to give us autonomy. And so this boundary nature, I'm kind of really being broad with this process, but this subject is probably one of the most fascinating to me in explaining these things. And you can see that in my explanation of this, and because it's so intimate with me, you can see the trauma. because this is how I have hyper-rationalized the context of life relative to a system that has given me a sense of orientation to the world. And yet the fundamental essence of embodiment is gone because it's too mental. And that is what the embodiment process is. It's coming back into the feminine. It's going like, okay, cool, fantastic. Jupiter-Pisces age, religion, does it change the price of milk? No. You know, so, okay, well, what does the meaning of my most immediate existence reflect in relation to this more greater cycle? Well, probably not much in terms of an overarching 2,000-year process. But if I connect with what's real for me and what's alive for me and how that's moving through me every single day, and I essentially integrate with that, well, then there's a small piece of a 70-year, 80-year potential life in which there will be some meaning, you know, and specifically born at the time that I was born and the time I'll live to witness certain cycles, well, that will be a reflection of the more embodiment process, right? Accepting my own mortality and these things. So I hope that's too abstract, but just kind of circling back to, while it is amazing to spend time in this very profound abstract world of understanding cycles and how they've impacted our societies and our worlds and our belief systems, there's also just coming back to right where I am in the moment. And that was me healing my trauma. That was the moment where I realized, okay, this is the actual purpose of my work, because it didn't help that I would be able to answer all the questions in a very hypothetical way when my dad passed. But when I didn't actually tap into the grief or the repressed anger or the sadness, that I realized that it doesn't help with these deep philosophical structures, even if I'd spent time, you know, in them. It was what was real for me in terms of that relationship that really brought me into my humanity, you know, and that's coded in the astrology. At any point in time that you feel that you want to jump in and share some thoughts, etc., please feel. But for me, I will just kind of express.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Like, I could have sat there and listened all day, which, you know, I'm not surprised with your YouTube channel and watching your videos. And like, yeah, that's just one thing that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned. Sure. You talked about, you know, the cyclical nature of the universe itself. And one thing that I came across is you talked about how we have a cognitive sense of awareness now, and that we used to look at the skies and relate to it in a very feminine way. Now, I find that very, very interesting, especially as you brought it up, because what I'm trying to do with my Noetic Nomads project is actually, I want to bring more of the feminine or yin energy, the waves being and knowing into the culture, into the spotlight. And that's just not just through, you know, female guests, but also like the feminine ways of being and knowing, like we were talking about. So I just wondering if we could explore, and if you could speak on what exactly do you mean by these masculine, feminine, cognitive versus other ways of knowing, the circular view of nature.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, I'll introduce human design. And again, I'm very aware of the fact that a lot of these concepts might be new to some people that are watching your channel. And so I'm going to try to remain as practical as possible, but I can promise you right now that when you jump into exploring the cosmology that is human design and the cosmology that is EA, all of these profound understandings, just that I know this is going to sound a bit weird, but people would, not that I've been on this experience, absolutely, but people have almost in a sense ascribed to being addicted to a hardcore drug. You know, when you expose yourself to the philosophies of like particularly human design in terms of its cosmology and how it describes the stars and the relationship to neutrinos and how they are actually what is coding our DNA. And we think this is happening here, but really it's actually a transition of something completely different. So I'm going to jump into that.
Oh, yeah. Wait, I just want to jump in real quick, Simon. Yeah. Do not be worried at all about sounding weird. Anyone who's watched any of my videos know how weird I am and like all the crazy stuff. Like, and I talk about all the time about like how I'm emptying myself and being like a vessel of the universe. And I feel like this whole Noetic Nomads project is like the universe speaking through me. So trust me, you're definitely not the weirdest person here, especially not even in this conversation. So don't worry about it. So go ahead.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. I liked what you talked about there, by the way, because that would be a very practical reflection of embodiment of wisdom of natural feminine qualities, right? Really allowing yourself to be receptive to insights, impulses, and allowing yourself to almost be in a co-creation with life and seeing it not as something that is separate from us, but in a very symbiotic way, always in consistent relation to what life is presenting to us. And we might translate that using the system of human design as, your aura. You can use EEA as this is your soul. It doesn't matter either way, as long as you're really in touch with and communion with life as it presents you with synchronicities, ultimately, right? And following that path. So in a sense, you don't even need any of these systems as long as you can really connect deeply with that intimate realization that life is a co-creative experience of an intimacy. That's why we're so afraid of it, because it means death. Our ego surrenders its sense of influence over its mode of music environment to the realization that we're in an intimate co-creating experience. And there are awarenesses and the morphogenetic field, if you want to use more scientific exposure, but these states are here. And when we allow ourselves to tap into them and tune into them and drop into the emotional body, we're actually able to tap into that space. And, that's a very profound place to be. And I wouldn't say that it's something that we're always consciously able to do all the time because we have outside distractions. So EUA would define that as separating desires. Just wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about how you were talking about this feminine nature and integrating it. And that's very much a reflection of that process, what you were sharing. So if I were to use the system of human design to be able to articulate this profound relationship between living life as society through symbolism, right? We can just look back at history in terms of different civilizations. We can think of the Egyptians as an example, using symbolic language to translate the phenomena of what it is that their culture and their civilization was experiencing. To me, there's something really profound about the Egyptian culture in the sense that they were really tapping into this idea of afterlife and reincarnation, and essentially what I consider to be something really profound, and I'd love to share it, which is this relationship to the human experience being about transcending death and living in eternity. Okay, so there's this deep kind of process that we're all on, in some way, shape, or form, able to tap into, living beyond our physical senses. Right. So a way that we could translate that in more physical terms would be the idea of Jung's ideas. He's not here physically, but the nature of his essence is transcended his physical life. And he is now immortal within the constellation of our own worldview, just as other people that have got profound impact on our cultural awareness, they exist within our constellation. If we had to see our life as a constellation, there are stars that are embedded into our constellation that we draw attention from whenever we invoke that energy. And to me, the Egyptians kind of really represented this process of immortality. If you look back at civilizations, you can see that we've always had this very intimate relationship between the motion of the sky and how it impacted life on Earth. People would tend to not grow their crops during the winter period because they recognized that when the sky was at a specific point, this would indicate cold weather. This is pretty much how astrology was used in the past. Very feminine nature, very, very respectful of cycles, very in tune with the way that the earth would change its behavior in relation to seasonal shifts, and kind of really tune in with that. It's sensory based, right? Whereas more of the masculine approach would be to notice using our mind and to measure things. So we would invent the clock, we would invent the watch. And we would use a Monday to Friday kind of behavior in which on Monday, we named it Monday even, and then we had from 7 o'clock until 5 o'clock, we would work, right? It's very left brain, logical, very linear in its nature. But how you feel on that day is a very feminine principle, right? So we very much defined our days based on our ability to create coordinates using our left brain, this more masculine process. But that's not being in touch with something. think about the feminine nature. You know, if your dad had a very feminine quality, you would sense that he would be very soft with you, but that would be generally associated with mom's behavior, right? Because not only did she birth you, but you would associate her soft touch on your skin as nurturing, right? So we already know that the feminine quality's got something that's about sensitivity. It's about softness. It's about calming down just for a moment, just taking it all in, just really feeling what's present for me right now. No intention, just really, really present, as opposed to anchoring the masculine in more, and it's coming more up to the throat and wanting to express very, you know, looking up and seeing, like a tree, for instance, it grows up like that, but without its roots, it's not going anywhere, right? You know, you can see the beauty, and that's what EA did for me. It allowed me to say, hey, by the way, or at least when Jeffrey Wolf Green, who brought through evolutionary astrology, he was like, this is not something that we're here to prove. It's a mere observation, correlation, mechanic. And so it's rooted in nature. You know, if you want to learn about the sign Capricorn, don't study the astrology internet. Go and understand the function of a bark on the tree. And I was like, oh, every being in my cells just got, and that's why to me, when I talk about astrology, I don't think about it in the sense of what I've learned in a book. I go and study nature. And then I come back and I say, oh, okay, Neptune and this is transiting here. The combination of those two archetypes are going to represent that. You know?
Yeah. I just want to add in, like, that is brilliant. Is what I came across in when I was doing my research is like what you talked about there, about if you want to learn about this, you just study the bark of a tree. And then the example you gave was, for example, what parts of nature represent what signs and what archetypes. And for example, you mentioned the skin, and you're like, okay, what does the skin represent? And you said it represents Capricorn. Why? Because it's hardness. It's like a shield, like the bark on a tree represents Capricorn and what the archetype of Capricorn. And then you also went on to say, okay, now what's the opposite sign on the chart? Sorry, first, I just want to apologize if I'm butchering any of this. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
I love it.
And for example, the opposite sign of Capricorn on charts was Cancer. And what emerges out of the context of boundaries and protection of Capricorn, it was safety, security, alignment, nourishment, nurturing. It was like you refer to it as squishiness. It is the skin. It is the bark. It is the hardness of Capricorn, which affords this squishiness, that which we want to protect and nurture. So I just wanted to add that I thought that was really fascinating. That how you study nature, and then that's when you don't start from astrology necessarily, and then nature. You go from nature and then astrology. If I'm getting that properly,
exactly. Yeah. You know, and to as you shared that right now, you know, thoughts popped into my head where I was thinking that I kind of use the astrology language to translate that deep intuitive knowing, but there's a part of me that feels like it's a necessity to reach people in terms of where they are when they're seeking astrology. And that's what's really actually interesting about when I say that, to me, astrology is the gate, the opening portal to this unconscious space. And the language itself allows me to translate that deep intuitive knowing of those things or observations. And ultimately, if I was going to say, you know, if you really want to go and study astrology, or like my students, for instance, I'd say the best place to start is to just be very conscious of life, because it is that. We've just used our left brain to kind of compartmentalize stuff. But when we anchor the feminine into the process here, we allow it to teach us. Let nature be the teacher for us. You know, exactly. I just sit and say, can you tell me what to do? And it goes, yes, here we go. And I'm like, okay, thank you very much.
One thing you mentioned is that, like, when I was looking up your work, is that you talked about how, like, humanity hasn't had the integration over the past 1,000 years or so of spiritual teachers. And I don't know, like, I guess we could put religion into that. Maybe we could even put like pre-EA astrology into that. And like, and that this hasn't allowed us to initiate the younger parts of ourselves into the process of what life is about. And that made me very curious. And could you please speak more on this? Like, what do you mean by initiating the younger parts of ourselves? And also my own thought is there some relation here with like the disappearance of rites of passage in the modern
Yes.
world? I wondered if that
Yes.
was related.
100%. That's exactly what I mean. It is. So for instance, let me give you an example. Okay. So we have society's expectations and ideas of what it means to be successful. So generally speaking, by the time we get to the age of 30, the cycle of your soul's life will have reached a point in which this is a very big landmark. And this landmark is a passage from a sense of freedom and exploration and lostness to a point in which you start to recognize your own mortality. Okay, in a very sobering type of way. It's like, well, okay, so what am I going to do with my education? What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to do with this? And so what generally tends to happen around the ages of 28 and 33 is, in a very unconscious way, no judgment, but very unconscious way, we buy a house, we get married, we commit to something. Now, on the surface, it looks like a tradition that we all do, as, you know, oh, that person's getting married, so therefore I need to get married, as an example.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this kind of pattern of reflection in our behavior relative to these points that when we see society, we go, okay, that person's doing that, so I got to do that, right? But really what's actually happening beneath the surface is a very big, we're reaching what is called the Saturn return. And from the perspective of seeing the soul, and the soul as this journey, and not our personalities and what we've been told to be, etc., but what the soul's journey is. In other words, what is your emotional development? Why are you here? That point correlates to coming home. It correlates to you've journeyed out into the world and you've experienced all the things you've experienced, and now this energy is pulling you back into the womb. You're coming back to the place. Okay, that is the place that you originally came from. And in that 2-year period, it's going to feel like restriction. It's going to feel like you're weighted down. You're going to feel like you're depressive. You're going to feel like there's heaviness. This is with you. And so a lot of people resist that because our society, and this is the point, it has been shaped by a very masculine only behavior mechanism, which is ambition. Right, we're seeking God up there, and so therefore we translate that as, I haven't got my BMW yet, therefore I'm not part of whatever thing. So I value myself in relation to this external structure of value systems. And the reason why we haven't been able to really kind of confront that as a collective is because we didn't even know that there was anything beyond that, or that we existed beyond that, because of the very, and again, I speak this in a very broad and very general sense, because of course there are a lot of other aspects of people that have not had this, but for mostly the children's relationship to the mother and that early attachment psychologically and emotionally wasn't nurtured in a way that it would be ideally wanting to be nurtured, which is, at least for the first 3 years of your life, to be very, very consistently told by your mom and your dad, hey, I love you, you're going to be safe, and here's how you can adventure. So that sense of core self gets fractured. And so we start to then take in all of the traumas that we as a society have. And it's very much rooted in, go to daycare, mom, dad's going to go work, and we'll see you once in a while, as opposed to this very intimate connection of consistent love and appreciation. Because from the 2-year-old's perspective, it's not going, Dad, Mom, I can really see the importance in your work right now. And I can see why you're putting me in this place where there's lots of faces. I have no idea who they are. And you wonder why at the age of 28, we have trust issues. Wow. Because our attachment, right? So there's this entire lostness of our humanness through this extensive search for meaning existentially, and how we've lost our way in terms of who we really are at the heart of our senses. And this is kind of returning to us and through crisis. It always emerges through crisis. And that's a lot of the reason as to why John Vervaeke's work, and many other people that are on the Rebel Wisdom platform are speaking in these winds. And that's why a lot of people are actually seeking, because while this crisis is taking place, it's fracturing our comfort zones. It's fracturing our sense of, this is how things have always been, and it's opening doorways to parts of ourselves that we didn't give attention to because of this lostness that has been embedded within our psyche, within our constellation. Because again, this is just ancestral material.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I think the reason that I created this, right? The reason that we're doing this work, we're talking, Rebel Wisdom, like from what, like speaking of Rebel Wisdom, I believe they've more than doubled their membership since the start of COVID. Like it's going crazy. And I don't know if you're aware of the Stoa. They've been birthed from this. I could say that maybe Noetic Nomads was birthed from Rebel Wisdom and Stoa. It's like that. It's like I'm like a product of that. And again, like we're going through this, you know, transition phase, and it's what like, you know, like, you know, Dan Schmachtenberger and the Game B movement, they talk about how like we're either going to, you know, progress into a higher state of order and complexity, but you know, there's the possibility, of course, we're at this inflection point that we may actually collapse into a lower state of order and complexity, and you know, who knows from there. And one thing that I came across, I believe it was your very first video. It had to do with Jupiter in Cancer back in 2014, and I thought that had. I mean, it's funny because like that video back then, 6 years. Talk about right now. I mean, how it couldn't be more pertinent, and how you're talking about how, like, again, like I'm sorry, I don't want to butcher it, but it's basically
you go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so it's basically how this Jupiter in Cancer. It was basically we were in this transition. This was maybe allowing us to be more intuitive and connected to the earth, to nature, and to be open, like we were talking about to feminine ways of knowing, and to becoming more natural and grounded and aligned with the natural world around us. And so I was wondering, like how that relates, if that relates to anything that's happening now, and also with human design, also the move from the Saturnian way of being to the Uranian, from the 7 to the 9. So it seems like I'm not surprised that you're into all these, because they all seem to be related.
Yeah, there's tons of content here, and you know, let's just you know, experience. Let's go. Yeah, you know what I mean, right? It's just ton. This is my inner child is fully lit at the moment when it comes to expressing these things, you know. Okay, so let's talk about. I wanted to just respond quickly to the Rebel Wisdom movement and many of the kind of parallels that are drawn in relation to trying to make sense, right? So sense making. So from my position, understanding evolutionary astrology, when I see the word sense making and the collapse of sense making within the constellation, I attribute it to the sign Neptune that's transiting through the constellation Pisces. Okay. And it takes 144 years for this planet to move through the entire zodiac. So when it reaches the same point again, we generally tend to see a complete decay. So Neptune in nature is the archetype of something that decays. All right. Another way to see Neptune would be, here you have a city or like a small town. It's booming, it's vibing. There's a lot of spirits there. It's alive, right? 60 years on, and you go back to that place and there's nothing there. People have moved on. There's a sense of windows that have been broken. People have maybe found some shelter in there that haven't got homes. As an example, you can see it's kind of become derelict. That is the process. That is the best literal expression of Neptune, because it talks about the behavior of something that feels that the spirit is there. And then when things move on, the spirit moves on. What is remaining is the absence of spirit. So it looks depressive, an absence of meaning. What is the meaning of this? And what happens? It's very past tense nature. And also it shows how things, when it's not maintained in the physical world, they decay. Okay. So Neptune's transit through Pisces takes 144 years to go through. And when that planet moves through any sign, it reveals what has decayed. It reveals what has lost meaning. And it also, at the same time, it also points to where the new meaning exists. Now, the Neptune archetype, the best description of it in terms of how we experience it psychologically is, if you have a Neptune transit, what it will look like in your day is like, wow, I feel very kind of ungrounded. Like, you know, I'm trying to make sense of something, but my brain's not working. I feel like I'm having brain fog, right? That's because the nature of Neptune, when it permeates your awareness, it's very much like fog. As it moves through, it doesn't have substance, but it also creates a tremendous amount of confusion and clarity at the same time. So clarity would represent a complete insight that just in the moment you'd go, wow, because you feel the surge of incredible awareness that moves through. And of course, whatever it is that you become aware of, at the same time, you're also struggling to make sense of. So this idea of us losing sense of reality at this point in time is very much attributed to this transit of Neptune that it's been in the sign of Pisces for the last 10 years. And what is it correlating to? Well, it's correlating to the fact that what had meaning for us is no longer there. And everybody that is emotionally and psychologically attached to the old will experience a loss of meaning that will lead to a crisis. And what is our identity rooted in? Our philosophy. What is our sense of survival rooted in? Our philosophy. So if we have a crisis through loss of meaning, it sends us deep into the most primal nature of our needs. You know, how we're going to survive being one of them. And of course, it also correlates to, I love this term, and there's going to be a video that I'm going to do really, really soon to explain the current transit of Neptune through Pisces. And it talks about the mortification of ego. COVID, for instance, was the mortification of the ego for us as a collective, because what happened was we interfaced with something that told us, by under no circumstances do you have control, right? It literally, it felt like that. All of a sudden, you're going to work, you're getting your Starbucks coffee, etc. And then the next minute, you're having to sit online on Zoom trying to make calls with people, and everybody was going crazy. And you would find people going, wow, this is such an inconvenience. It's a death experience of our attachment to the behavior mechanisms that we are as human beings, because we're still biological by nature. We still have a limbic system. We still have very cognitive features that want to be able to have everything operates in a sequential way. But the universe is like, dude, we don't work like that. You know what I mean? It doesn't operate like that. So this mortification of the ego is a Neptunian experience. And when you lose a sense of self, you go through a passage of complete lostness. You feel lost. And so you can't make sense of things, can you? So we're just experiencing it at a collective level, you know? So I sit back and I watch this, and many other astrologers that are kind of tuned into that will just do the same. They'll be like, yeah, you know, it's nothing actually to be alarmed about, but it is funny. And I don't mean this in disrespect. It is funny to observe how it drives us crazy, because we're trying to make sense of something that is so incredibly complex that it reveals to us the structure of how our mind works. So what I really want to say here in closing of that is, it's really interesting to me, and you'll watch a video at the beginning of the year. I actually took a time off where I was like, I'm not going to do this because I can see how I would do it myself. Is when COVID came along, every single person on YouTube relative to their channel came up with a version of their experience of what they thought it was, or how this was going to change in every way whatsoever. And if you got to just sit back and just observe it from this bird's eye perspective, you got to see the multidimensionality of how we try to process reality, but nobody really knows actually what's going on. You can only filter it through your own perspective, including me. You know? Exactly. And it was really interesting to observe this intense ability to try and make sense of things and how we were trying to rationalize it. And this leads me into human design, in the sense that I'm going to pause there and just kind of invite you to anchor in what was one of the questions that we were talking about, just so I can kind of touch base with it.
I saw the first video you ever made. I believe it was a Jupiter. Was it Jupiter in Cancer, and then going from the Saturnian to Uranian? Sure. And I just want to add my point in there, which I thought was very interesting, about how you said, oh, astrologers just sat back like, yeah, this is normal. We expect this. And I'm like, wow, so we could have maybe the astrologers, evolutionary, and perhaps other schools being like, hey, everybody come along, and like we could help steward you into the next age. And this is, I guess, why you're here. The synchronicity brought you here. So again, continue. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the weird thing about it is, Albert, is that I would sit here and I would say to you that, yeah, I sit back and I watch this. But when Jeffrey Wolf Green, and particularly Ra Uru, who brought through human design, he was like, dude, by 2027, humanity is going to really struggle.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that date. I saw that year. I was very curious about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I did a lecture in 2008 in the States on that time and what transits would be taking place. It was super cool in terms of understanding how it correlates to the Saturn-Uranus transits. Okay. So let's see if I can kind of ground this for us. Okay. That video with Jupiter transit through Cancer, in the core truth of EA, the Cancer archetype has 3 abstract points in it. Okay, so imagine that there's a bowl like this, and in that bowl are three abstract points, okay, that speak to, in more practical terms, a current of awareness that filters through the human experience as to why we need this deep sense of connection to Earth. I mean, I don't even know how to. That's why I haven't attempted to even try to talk about this, because unless you actually truly want to sit down and pay attention to it, and you have 3 hours to talk, it will make sense. But they're called planetary nodes. So every planet in the chart has also points in which it has an evolutionary intention.
Okay.
So everybody that studies astrology will know that they have a moon, a south node, and a north node. But EA goes, hey, by the way, actually, there's this whole entire spectrum in which every planet has a nodal axis. And these positions, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, sit in the constellation Capricorn. And these deep planetary node points usher our awareness. In other words, the best way to describe it is, you know how you got a record player and it's got those grooves in it?
Yeah.
Okay. Planetary nodes are those grooves, and they essentially hold our awareness. And so our awareness is filtered through these two signs.
Yeah.
So when you have planets, or particularly at that point, Jupiter, move through that groove within that constellation, what it does is it awakens us collectively. Okay. It awakens us collectively. And it was at a point in which there were aspects and transits taking place that was revealing where we have attachments to the old ways of doing things. In a very simple term, it revealed where we would be sensitive and become cognizant of patterns deeply buried within our psyche from a humanitarian perspective, not just individually, but us as a collective, where we have these just behavior mechanisms and we say, oh yeah, this is how things are. Well, these planets came along and said, this is the end of the line. It no longer goes forward like this. And so that represented a massive shift. 2014 was a massive shift in terms of energetic direction. And while at that time it didn't appear to be something that was legitimately real, we're seeing the ramifications of those transits now, today. Black Lives Matter, that is unresolved complex trauma that is materializing into the collective, in which there hasn't been a right balance of energy. So what you're seeing here is the shadow quality, the displaced emotional trauma that is coming into our collective that we need to process. And that Jupiter transit was the culprit. It was the one that came along and said, okay, I'm going to bring this to the surface. And it needed to be sewn into our culture to be able for us to actually see it in a more tangible way. So that was a really profound period of time. It was a planetary node activation. And again, I've talked about it briefly on my channel, but I suppose I'm the only one amongst maybe a few other people that really study that get to see that in that way. But it is my hope soon to be able to try and translate that.
Interesting. And is there like a correlation again with the Saturnian and the Uranian, or is this, because I know that's like a far longer time scale. I believe that started in 1781, right? Yes. And then like if there's any sort of relation with what's going on and the Uranian versus the Saturnian, is there anything with that?
Yes, there is, and it has to do with the generation of people that were born between 1991 and 1995. So there was a very distinct planetary activation that took place between two planets, Uranus and Neptune. They moved through the sign of Capricorn. And so what they did was they brought through this awareness, they brought through into our collective awareness technology, essentially, right? That it completely changed the landscape of our society. So it impregnated us with awareness. And that's why you'll see between 1991 and 1999, a tremendous amount of explosion of technology. Windows Explorer, Microsoft became even more popular, Netscape, the internet, cell phones came in. We became very conscious of this new impregnated energy that came in here. In fact, at the 21st of December, we'll have what is called the Jupiter-Saturn Conjunction. It will happen in the sign of Aquarius. And this sign will speak deeply to the integration from a necessity perspective of what the last 20 years have been like. I will even go as far as to say the last 25 years that we've been moving through, it's now going to be here, integrated into our culture. And the way that you'll see that is the Prime Minister of the UK, was, instead of going to the House of Commons to go and do whatever they do there, he was actually on a big TV screen in the House of Commons on his Zoom call. And it was like, even the politicians need to use technology to be able to now do the things because of COVID. And you'll watch that. You'll just see an explosion of necessary integration of technology into our society. And those that don't do it just becomes extinct. And so the significance of that Saturn-Uranus transit that took place was the onset of what Ra calls, and it's fascinating to discover, the onset of our awareness to begin perceiving reality beyond the physical. So if you observe from that period onwards, Nietzsche, amongst Age of Enlightenment, all of that type of stuff became more prevalent within our psyche, but it was very youthful, it was very young. I would say probably from December 21st onwards, we will get to see the significance of that impact in 1781, because now we're sitting, okay, and the Saturn realm is, I'm not in your same country. That's the Saturn, that's the boundary, right? It's the physical awareness. We're not having a podcast discussion where you're sitting over there and we can shake hands. The Uranian realm is the capacity to sit in a completely different time zone and be present through this morphogenetic field and tap into awareness without boundaries. That's what that represented. Wow. And now we live in it because we have the technology. And that was instilled from 1993 up until today.
Yeah, that completely dovetailed. Oh, and when you're talking about, how like it had to do with like our, I guess, identity or this way of being that's beyond just the physical. And then we're sitting here on Zoom because it's distance, but still we can connect. And one of the themes that like I've been doing with all my conversations and all my connections with people, this is crazy. I don't know if this is the same for you, but before COVID hit, I was really disconnected from everyone. I'm not just like with like the society or the people around me, even my own family members. Like, I would live close to them and I would just feel disconnected. However, after COVID hit and I was forced to basically sit in my apartment all day, and because they're like, okay, if you go out there, we're going to put you in jail, we're going to find you or whatever. And it's just like, I've never felt more connected with other people, even though these physical barriers. And that's just me. And I'm like, am I the only person? I've talked to many people, including guests, and like, yeah, I feel the same way. So it's crazy. This has been like a forcing function. And from the, like I said, from the astrological point of view, they're like, oh yeah, this is, It's
yeah,
like,
pretty much. That's right.
This is pretty much what's happening. And I think that's amazing. And again, that's why I'm so grateful you're here and speaking to us. And so what I wanted to move into, speaking about identification with something more than the physical. I remember you spoke about how like a lot of the tools, with spirituality, especially in the West, a lot of tools that are inviting us to exit the physical realm and kind of enter the non-physical. It can lead to a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, skepticism and whatnot. Sure. And that it's like this relation between the personal identity structure in the physical realm and the spiritual. Is like this relation may be what's contributing to perhaps this conflict. So I was wondering if we could just go over like the notion of spirituality and how we should be in relation with all this, whether physical, spiritual, the transpersonal, transspiritual. I was just wondering.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a coincidence that people like Jung, for instance, would be very much associated with rebel wisdom and a tremendous amount of what influences or people find relation to him. Another person who I encourage you to go and investigate is James Hillman. Brilliant psychotherapist. He's old now. Who else? Who I'd encourage you to check out. We know about Freud in that way. Joseph Campbell.
Joseph Campbell. Yes, definitely.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So in the context of why I started there, my point and reference is Pluto was discovered in 1930. Okay. And Pluto is the planet that is furthest away from the sun within the context of our identified solar system. And in fact, there's a video that I've got on my channel where it talks about the astronomy of Pluto in relation to our solar system and how, if we translate that to the human psyche, what we're seeing here with the onset of Pluto's discovery is the awareness in our collective field around conscious, and particularly the unconscious attachment to what drives us, okay, and disempowerment, etc. I would say that at the turn of the century, with Pluto's discovery and taking into consideration the Uranian field becoming more conscious, and I remember Jordan Hall or Jordan Green, I can't remember which one he goes by anymore, but he talked about
Hall now. Yeah,
Hall. Okay.
Yeah.
So he talked about we're not in a Saturnian Chronos state, but more in a Kairos state. And I had a synchronicity, I think 2 days ago, where some astrologer was defining their work as Kairos. And I was like, yes. To me, that is, in the most simplistic terms, the response to that, the suggestion to that in terms of the new spirituality is, and I'm going to add the human design stuff here, which just, I love it so much, but you really need to be open-minded to understand this process. I mean, as in people, right?
Yeah.
Is that this Kairos notion is Uranian because we're opening up our sphere of awareness to the quantum field. And so we are in a quantum state at the moment. Just the fact that we're interacting with each other on a different time scale relative to the mind, but yet within the construct of the non-divisible world, the morphogenetic field, we're actually present with each other with no time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that to me is that beautiful relationship between the awakening of the Uranian field. It is beyond our senses. Do we get to see and understand reality in a more fractal way? Right? Are you on my fractal? And are we digesting reality similar in that way? And that's why you'll see people that will align with certain things, and that's their fractal, right? That's what they're seeing, that's what they're doing, etc. Coming back to this idea of spirituality, well, the Virgo-Pisces age was deeply rooted and enmeshed in seeking God through a monotheistic way, which was there's only one God, there's only one way to spirituality. And so therefore all religions are like this, very top-down heavy. The transition into the Aquarius age, or particularly the onset of the Uranus awareness, 1781, the Pluto-Uranus transit that happened in 1965, and where they coincide with in regards to the genetic matrix of the human design chart, and then talking about where we are today in terms of the actual physical experience of people reflecting this transition, we needed to deny religion as a natural evolutionary state because it represented the loss of the self, the true self, the true Albert, and what he really represented and what lit him up. He had to surrender that in order to find and align with some more cosmic truth that was given to you and said, okay, this is your truth, as opposed to the Aquarius age, which is actually, no, sorry, outdated, old paradigm. This is what seems to actually create aliveness in me. This is what's real for me. This is the path. And so as a natural function, psychologically and emotionally, we would also experience fracturing within the family unit. Okay. And this fracturing would mean that we're interfacing between genetic material that is influenced by the outdated end of the line reality, which is follow one God. And that's that genetic profile, and then interfacing with the new genetic profile, which says, I reject those truths and want to find my own. And so on the surface, it looks like, wow, I don't really get along with my family anymore, or I don't align with my dad's truths anymore, etc. That's what it looks like at surface. But actually beneath that is an emergence of individual truth. In other words, when you look at the world and I look at the world, what do we see that's unique to us? And that's the emerging spirituality. It's radically different from one idea of God. It is an individual sense of truth that is relative, that is for you, and how you perceive it. And if we can agree that we might differentiate in our perceptions and still not feel the need to try and convince each other that that's wrong, then we are truly embodying the new spiritual stage, which is the capacity to sit in a very humanitarian way and say, oh, that's a very interesting cosmological landscape you have. I wonder how that's influenced by your trauma. I wonder how that's influenced by your response mechanisms to life, and how you've actually had mystical experiences that you can translate to another person because they're yours. And anchoring that into the physical. And so, in a dovetailing experience, this is about the integration of the feminine, because in EA, we talk about this process of evolution is through the body. right? It's the emotional body. And so through the emotional body is that, you know, the limbic system needs to be able to have an experience emotionally to be able to change the neurochemistry in the brain. We know this already through neuroscience. So we can pontificate the nature of the existence in a very intellectual stratosphere, very masculine kind of their way. But when you come back down to this point and you have a conversation with somebody and you get triggered and you project that process and you don't own your own shadow, you don't see your feminine. You don't see what you've come here to grow, right? The feminine is receptive. It's in the darkness, right? So going into that darkness and being transmuted through that and then coming back out again is the process of the metamorphosis that we all have available to us, right? So that's why there will be a lot of facilitators of embodiment, because in order for us to go into the body, we need to understand what it's about. And that's another thing about Kairos. It's in the moment, present with yourself, as opposed to, again, very much pontificating the abstract nature of whatever, and then still having no money to buy your food because you haven't actually, you know, you're disassociated. That's what it was. It was disassociation that led to self-deception.
Yeah, that was incredible. You pretty much explained what's going on, not just with what's, you know, out there in the world, but with me. It's like, why am I drawn to this project? Why am I drawn to these people? Why am I trying to bring, you know, the more feminine aspect? Why am I bringing Monica? Like literally Monica, like she posted on Circle, on the Rebel Wisdom Circle, like literally right away, I'm like, hey, Monica, I like you. Come on my show. And right away, she's like, yeah. I'm like, what the hell? What the hell was that? And like, that's never happened before. Just like,
right.
Like all of this is making sense. Like again, when you talk about how like we're trying to make room for all these individual truths, and it's like this sense-making crisis, this meaning-making crisis, and all this is all starting to come together and make sense. And I guess it's not surprising what you're doing with your work is like trying to bring this lens that people can really resonate with and that they can embody. So this has been exactly. And that's the thing, like what I want to do with Noetic Nomads, when you talk about how like it's really easy that we could intellectualize, you know, all this stuff, right? Like I'm not going to name any names, but even in the sense making space, we have a lot of people, you know, going like being like galaxy brains. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds real nice, but like I don't like what is coming from that, which is why with what I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to move from sense making to change making. I'm trying to embody what you know all these people are talking about, and trying to get people like you out here to help embody people. So yeah, I just want to say, Simon, this has been amazing. This is going to be enlightening, not for just everyone listening, but when I edit this episode, I'm going to get even more embodied and get even more wisdom bombs. So again, thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely welcome. Loved it. Thanks very much for not only being enthusiastic about the process, but holding the space, you know, holding the circle for two people to share their shared experiences and to try and make sense of things in a way that's relative to your own view. So loved it. Awesome.
Yeah. Awesome. And okay, so I'm just gonna end with a quote from, I believe, one of your favorite astrologers, Dane Rujar. Sorry for butchering that.
That's all good.
Okay, so the quote is: "The essential purpose of astrology is not so much to tell us what we'll meet on our road, as it is to suggest how to meet it and the basic reason for the meeting, which quality in us, which type of strength is needed to go through any specific phase of our total unfoldment as an individual person." So that kind of embodies what you're doing here, what I'm trying to do here. So again, do you have any final thoughts before we leave our audience left yearning for more from Simon Vorster?
Yes, I did want to say one thing quickly, just before we end, in terms of like what you were sharing. You know, the feminine, when we allow ourselves to really understand the difference between the masculine process and the feminine process, the insight and awareness that comes from the feminine is so still, and it's really beautiful. And there's very little intellectualization. In fact, there's just stillness. And what permeates from that stillness is a profound metaphysical sensory perception of knowing. And that's something that if we led with as one of the kind of tools that allows us to navigate and make sense of the world, as in how we connect to ourselves, and how we develop and bond more with that part of us that's not wanting to try and rationalize something or try and make sense of it, but to just allow our senses and our emotions to actually be the communicator of that. There's an intelligence that is present, so much more profound than our brain's capacity to make sense of things, because it's not influenced by set structure of truths or ideologies or experiences, but more along the lines of what's actually beyond. And it's becoming more in touch with that process that really allows us to see and feel so much more. It's a beautiful place, actually, to be honest. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in terms of what you were talking about there. It's coming into the feminine and really dropping into that state and allowing that truth to guide us.
Yes, absolutely beautiful. Simon, where can people find out more about you, which I'm sure they will want to do after listening to this?
Our website, Raising Vibrations, there's a hyphen between raising and vibrations. So www.raising-vibrations.com. You will find a plethora of information there. We write articles on new and full moons to kind of guide and embody the experience. There are schools. My partner teaches human design. There are astrology schools there. There's loads of workshops that I've created for different experiences that you want to understand and learn. So that's the website. Again, lots of content there. We have an Instagram account where we post daily material that allows you to kind of try to make sense of things that potentially would be happening within your life, just kind of process and keep in touch. So that's Instagram, and that's also just raising. I think that you'll put a link in the description, right? Yeah. So Instagram there. We have a Patreon community. And so if you just go to Patreon and you type in Raising Vibrations, you'll find that there's a community that we've created, myself and my partner, and we host that as a very closed space to get more intimate with people that resonate with our work. And there's lots of sort of perks that we offer there with our Patreon community. And of course, the YouTube channel. So again, if you just type in my name and Raising Vibrations, you'll find my YouTube channel. And I wanted to say with that anybody that's watching this and you would like videos on describing things, or trying to make sense of more of the concepts that I'm talking about, etc., feel free to always just message us and say, hey, I'm really curious about what you shared over there. Would you mind creating a video explaining that at a more deeper level? I always respond to that with a lot of excitement. So yeah. Pretty much.
Wow. Super generous of you, Simon. Oh my God. Again, you're here, raisingvibrations.com. That's raising with a hyphen, vibrations.com. You have the Instagram, you have the YouTube channel, Patreon. Contact Simon anytime, and he's going to be amazing. He's going to get back to you, give you the content you want. I'll put all those links in the show notes. So again, thank you so much, Simon, for coming on. You're amazing. You enlighten me and you enlighten the audience, I'm sure. And then that's it for another episode of Noetic Nomads. Peace out, everyone, and step up because the world needs you. Okay, goodbye. All righty, we are...